like-for-like strike action when it's not the most dangerous time for the NHS. They have chosen not to take up that offer.
They'll walk out for 5 days from Wednesday morning after rejecting a new government offer. The BMA says the strike is still entirely avoidable and that it's willing to work to find a solution. Donald Trump has made an extraordinary attack on Hollywood director Rob Reiner, who was found stabbed to death with his wife. The US president described the 78-year-old as struggling and someone obsessed with him. The filmmaker's youngest son has been arrested on suspicion of murdering his parents. Australia's government has agreed to look at strengthening gun laws after yesterday's attack on Bondi Beach. 15 people were killed and around 40 injured by 2 gunmen. And Britain's summoned the Chinese ambassador after Jimmy Lai was found guilty of national security offences in Hong Kong. The pro-democracy campaigner, a British citizen, was arrested in 2020 after huge anti-government protests. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 102 points at 97.51. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.14. LBC weather. Cloudy across England and Wales tonight, with rain moving eastwards. A patchy frost for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and lows of 1 to 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
It's 2 minutes past 8. It's Monday's Cross Question on LBC. Welcome to the programme. With us on the panel tonight, sitting to my left, Polly Toynbee, the columnist for The Guardian. To her left, nobody else's, Richard Holden, Conservative Shadow Transport Secretary and MP for Basildon and Billericay. To my right, Salma Shah, political commentator, who used to be an advisor to Sajid Javid at the Home Office. And next to her, Tony Vaughan, making his debut on the programme, Labour MP for Folkestone and Hythe, the first ever Labour MP for that constituency, which is an achievement, I think. So they are waiting for your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number. And of course, you can watch us on the LBC app, the Global Player app, or the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Now, I should say at the beginning that our 2 MPs are going to have to leave us in about 10 minutes, but I think they're going to come back. But there is a vote on the finance bill, which is apparently very important. I did suggest that they could cancel each other out, but the whips won't allow it, and you never disobey the whips. Right, Graham in Stirling has our first question. Hi, Graham.
Hi there. I was just wondering, has Donald Trump just proven beyond doubt that he's unfit to be president? And if yes, how are we meant to work with that as our most important ally?
Oh, and what's he done this time, Graham?
The Rob Reiner comment.
Right,
let's
give a bit of background to that. Now, a day after the Hollywood director Rob Reiner, best known for When Harry Met Sally, and his wife were found stabbed to death in their own home, Donald Trump has posted on his own Truth Social platform that Reiner died reportedly due to the anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome. Reiner's son Nick has been arrested in connection with the killings. Salma, let's come to you first.
Well, obviously these are really appalling comments, and particularly from somebody who's supposed to lead tributes, especially when there's a lot of sensitivity. But I would say that the President of the United States acting with bad taste is not something that is unknown. And I think it really speaks less about him, but more to the society that we live in today, that actually comments like this feel like they're able to be said and able to be written. So I'm not surprised by the way that this has happened, but I think we've got to ask ourselves as to whether it actually even matters anymore, whether people do feel appalled by it enough to withdraw their support.
Polly?
Oh, I'm quite shocked. I think that's one of the most terrifying things that you could hear a leader of a major country, let alone the major country, saying. It sounds kind of deranged. And you're right that, what's acceptable in society has slid downhill quite a long way. But partly because of him and the people around him and the sort of language that they've used and the sort of way they've behaved. He's created that society to quite a large extent.
Or has society created him?
Well, they've accepted him, which is, they've voted for him. I think also the other thing to remember that's serious, because the question was also about, whether he was fit, is that we have to take him seriously. He can say wild things and mad things, but he has a plan and he follows his plan, and we have to believe what he says. And when he says that in his latest national strategy that Europe is the enemy, we have to take that seriously.
He didn't say that.
Pretty much. I mean, there was nothing hostile about Russia and a lot hostile about Europe.
I accept that, but he didn't actually say that Europe was the enemy. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, he didn't actually say that, but everything that amounted to hatred of Europe and, quite happy with Putin.
Richard Holden.
I mean, strange thing to say, and why go and target somebody who's been murdered? It seems a very odd thing. I mean, I was actually at the CSU conference this weekend in Germany. German Conservatives. The German Conservatives, yeah, and I saw Frederick Merz speak, and I thought it was quite interesting how language is changing a lot at the moment, because both he and the leader of the CSU also talked in a way which I didn't think people would talk about the Second World War. They both referred to the Munich Agreement. We were in Munich with the CSU, and they both talked about how Europe should not slide towards or sign up to another Munich Agreement. And I found it absolutely fascinating the way that actually language is now changing in all sorts of different parts. We can go and pick on one of Trump's latest comments. I think it's slightly, but the bigger picture, I think we need to zoom out a bit, and how actually the language we talk about, and perhaps Polly's got a bit of a point around this, is how our allies talk about each other, our traditional allies. And there's also those comments that Merz made around Pax Americana and how Europe is changing as well. I also think, we've only seen in the last couple of years how the language and actions from Russia's invasion have changed. Fundamentally, countries like Sweden, who've been basically neutral for a couple of 100 years, but now not. And Finland and Norway, Finland and Poland have in the last year, I don't know if anybody is aware of this, have now reintroduced landmines. Right, they've unsigned the landmine treaties. Stuff which I don't think this has been widely reported, but there is real the change in the tone that has happened internationally has been huge. So obviously these individual comments are horrendous for the family, okay. But I think we need to sort of zoom out and see what comments have the impact they have in a wider world.
Tony Vaughan.
This is awful language. It's not the kind of language you use about people who've lost their lives, particularly if they've been murdered. I mean, it just is not befitting of the language of a president. I mean, at the same time, as Polly says, he is the president. He has been democratically elected, and it's important that Britain sustains a decent relationship with it. And the Prime Minister has been very good at building that relationship, as difficult as that's been. But I think it's when things like this happen, and particularly as Polly was talking about the global strategy, national security strategy, that I think it really does underline that Britain really does need to be increasing our cooperation and ties with Europe, because they are our closest trading neighbour. Strategically, it's important. All the things that Richard was saying about the threat coming from the east are all very real. And so I think we need to, look at these kind of comments in the context which they came, which is that it's a president essentially kicking off about something which in a way that he absolutely shouldn't. We do have to, unfortunately, work with him.
Right, let's move on to another question, because I know we've only got you for a short... How will we know when you have to go? Are you going to get bleeped?
Well, we have to go... So the votes are definitely happening at 8:24, because there's a time frame.
So how long does it take you to run over there?
So I think if you give us 9 minutes, we go quarter past,
right.
Then we're both relatively sprightly.
Right, yeah. I've got my marching orders.
One of us might have a hideous tie on, but we're relatively sprightly.
He's got a great tie on, which you can see. Glorious Technicolor on Global Player. Right, Adam is in St Albans. Adam, very good evening to you. What's your question?
Good evening, Ian and panel. Always a pleasure, sir. Is the upcoming juniors doctor strike going to have a negative effect on the way we see the future consultants of years to come in the NHS that care for us? But the crux to this, are they just financial chances boxing in Wes and the government?
Now, the resident doctors in the BMA have voted to go ahead with their 5-day walkout, which will begin at 7 a.m. on Wednesday. Tony Vaughan.
I think this strike should not be happening. I think there may well be legitimate concerns that they have, the resident doctors have about this package, but there was an offer that was made today that went over and above the previous offer that was made. And we've got, 50% of flu cases going up last week compared to the one before. This is not the time to be striking in this way. I'd call on the doctors to go back to the negotiating table and find a way through this. There has been an offer which has substantially built on previous offers, and I just think it's the wrong time to be doing this.
I've yet to hear a Labour MP support this strike, which is not what you might have, certainly in years gone by, you would have expected fairly solid support. Have you found that among your colleagues?
Well, the BMA don't speak for everyone in the BMA. I mean, a substantial minority disagreed with taking the strike forward, and I think the concerns of myself
83% have voted to continue it.
Yeah, and several percent have not. And I suppose the point that I'm making is that both my colleagues and I were very conscious about the fact that in our constituencies, up the road from my constituency is a hospital where people are being treated in corridors, a totally unacceptable situation, which this strike is going to make absolutely, it is going to compound the suffering that, frankly, it's my constituents and those in the surrounding areas are going to shoulder.
Polly.
Yep, I don't think very many people find it acceptable. I mean, this is their 15th strike. It's kind of never-ending. And the thing to remember, of course, is that they don't really lose any money because a couple of days of overtime after the strike's over, a few night shifts, they can earn it all back again. They're not most strikers take quite a hit, and they're not. And they are a very privileged group because, a doctor, once you get into medical school, which is, 4 people for every place, as soon as you are trained, you're on 38,000, and as soon as you're a fully trained consultant, you're 109,000. Lots of people in the NHS, in their teams, earn so much less that they seem to have sort of forgotten their privilege. They'll get good pensions and absolute security for life. Not many people start out in life like that, and I think they should be a bit more humble and a bit more aware of the teams around them.
You're becoming so right-wing, Polly.
I don't think that's right-wing. I think that they're just off on another planet. I don't think they're left-wing.
I don't think Richard could disagree with that.
I agree with Polly. I've never said that before, but I agree with Polly wholeheartedly.
Anything else, Tom?
I think, it's quite clear that there is, I really think the public support is moving. After that big pay rise they had a few years ago, I think there's very little public support for them on this, especially when other parts, less well-paid parts of the medical profession, for example, nurses or midwives, have seen far lower pay rises over the last few years. My mum was a ward clerk in a community hospital and retired just last year, and I think there is a real camaraderie on the wards usually. But I think when people are starting to see some pay rises for some staff, especially, as Polly says, so the ones who are the best paid to start off with, I think that could break down, and I don't want to see that happening in our hospitals. I'd also just say, though, we cannot just keep giving people massive pay rises and trying to buy them off. And I think that's always that dangerous situation where if you give people pay rises as was happened, in the last year, just under 30%, without the need for reform or to make any changes to contracts, I think you're sort of creating a rod for your own back, and we're in danger of entering a bit of a cycle on this.
Salma, the shorter your answer, the more time they will have to run back.
Can I just say, do you think maybe the doctors don't care what people think?
I hope that's not true.
I hope that's not true, but I do think that the most important thing here is that, yes, that relationship is going to break down between patient and carer, and what was a vocation seems like it's going to be transactional, and the best thing that the health secretary can do is stand firm and not keep coming back with offers. The offer is the offer.
Yeah. Kevin, it's been very unkind. He says, Iain, it's a good job you're not an MP. There and back in 9 minutes. You can't run to the loo and back in 9 minutes, can you? Well, there is an element of truth in that. Right, on your marks, get set, go. It's 8:15.
This is LBC.
For people
Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
60 minutes past 8 on LBC. And then there were two. We've lost two of our panellists because they've got to go and vote. It's the finance bill tonight, and there's a certain vote where apparently both whips offices have insisted that all of their MPs turn up to. In my naivety, I thought they might just cancel each other out, but no, that's not the way the system works. So I'm going to call this ladies' night now. Well, am I going to get into trouble for that? It's Polly Toynbee is with us. Salma Shah is with us. And we're going to go to another question. It's a WhatsApp question from Shahaf in Epsom. As an Israeli Brit who has opposed Benjamin Netanyahu for nearly 30 years, I know one thing for certain. When an anti-Semitic idiot decides to shoot Jews, he doesn't stop to ask about my politics. The marches may have started as anti-war or anti-genocide protests, but alongside unmoderated platforms like X, they now provide cover for anti-Semites and radical Islamists to spread open hatred. Is it time for the UK media and government to say this clearly and also to draw a firm line between Jews and Israelis as people and a political government that no longer even has the support of its own citizens? Polly Toynbee.
Very good point, indeed. What is anti-Semitism, and are all Jews guilty just because of Israel? Of course not. But they're being made to feel so, whether they're in a synagogue in Manchester or wherever. They are vulnerable just for being Jewish, without anybody stopping to say, what do you think about Netanyahu? I mean, I think Netanyahu is a monster, and I think an awful lot of Jews do too, and that he has made things much worse. But nevertheless, there's no, whataboutery about this. This is disgusting and obscene, and I'm afraid there's going to be more of it. You've had people calling for a global intifada, which means exactly that, attacking people on Bondi Beach or wherever. It means wherever you find Jews around the world, go for them, which is terrifying. But then at the same time, Muslims feel very vulnerable too. Their mosques get attacked and they feel under attack and they feel afraid as well. This is a dreadful global clash, terrifying.
Is this just more about religion than anything? Because you're absolutely right. A lot of Muslims do feel like that. A lot of Christians feel like that. And there are countries around the world, Nigeria being a prime example, where Christians do not feel safe walking the streets. And I remember in my A-level history, where we had a discussion about, well, is religion at the centre of all conflict in the world? And I mean, simplistically, you could say it is in a way, even nowadays, Salma.
Yes, but I think that is helpful in sort of defining tribal lines. But I don't think it really speaks to why we had, decades of improvement between, religions and relations and nations. And now we seemingly have this decline. And I wonder if it is about the fact that the world seems a much more dangerous, a much more difficult place, both in terms of security and in terms of economics, that actually that blame game has started, and the simplicity of the answer is that group must be bad, that group must be wrong, they must be out to get us, therefore that is the answer, and we need to get them before they get us. And I think, the question is absolutely right. I mean, in fact, it feels silly to me that we would have to try and create a divide between Jews versus people who support Netanyahu versus people, who are Israeli. And that whole concept that somehow that tribal division is the only thing that you should be measured or judged on, that is obviously prejudice. But where is that prejudice coming from? And frankly, I think there is a fear of complexity as well. And maybe social media compounds that. But just the fact that actually nobody is really willing to take a step back and try and understand what the situation is and where one should apply pressure and how one can apply pressure. People aren't interested in that anymore.
Where do you think this really started? I mean, it didn't start on October the 7th. I mean, anti-Semitism has been in this country and around the world for centuries. But would it be an exaggeration to say that this century of conflict that we're living in, it really did start on 9/11, where I mean, I don't remember before 9/11 there being even the word Islamophobia. Did that even exist before then?
That's been quite a new word, but it existed as a thing, if not as a word. I mean, you're saying, a few decades. Actually, this is centuries. You talk about religion. You could say, the existence of Jerusalem as the centre for the start of Christianity, for the start of Judaism and Abraham, and the start of Islam as well, has been a pernicious influence. I would say that. I'm vice president of the Humanists UK, so we're not very keen on religion. But there's no doubt that at the extreme ends, Salma says it's mostly a cultural thing. People are brought up to be whatever their culture says. But at the extreme ends, you've got the appalling attacks in the West Bank by extreme religious fanatics, Jewish fanatics, who believe every word of the Bible is true and that they were granted that line, and they are allowed to assassinate harmless people looking after their own land on the West Bank. And then on the other side, you have absolute atrocities from Islamists who think that if they're martyrs, they're going to go to heaven. Who knows what this father and son had in their mind? They appear not to have belonged to any particular group. They seem to have just decided for themselves that God was waiting for them, and that's terrifying.
This has been one of the difficulties in the security community for a long time, which is the lone wolf attack and the self-radicalisation. And that's why the sort of concept of policing content online, particularly harmful or extreme content online, has been so important. And it's now sort of bled into this idea of limiting free speech, which is a real difficult thing for most governments and regulators to handle. And I don't think that they've got that quite right yet. But also in the Australia case, how easy is it to obtain weapons and lethal weapons? And I think those two things are things that policymakers should ask themselves questions about. But still, it doesn't deal with this issue. I mean, I respect that you're a humanist, but I think that faith and religion can actually offer lots of beautiful things as well. And when you think about terrorist atrocities, quite often religious communities are the ones who are bringing people together and trying to bring forward that faith and understanding. So there's a corruptibility in the way that we talk about religion. It's tribes and its agendas, and it's covered with a religious label, but that's not what sits underneath it.
But do you not think we're effectively living in Groundhog Day? Because after each terror attack, we have politicians go on the media saying all the right things, or being empathetic, saying we've got to have interfaith understanding, and then the religious leaders come together. You get pictures of an imam and people from all other religions sort of say, yes, we're all at one here. And then the whole thing goes off the media agenda until it comes back on the media agenda for the next terror attack, and we go through the circle again.
And I absolutely agree with that assessment. It sort of becomes a cliche almost, but the question then you should be asking yourself, or certainly governments and law enforcers should be asking themselves, is what do we need to look at differently? And there are things around psychological profiling of people that might be vulnerable to this kind of propaganda that might force them to go out in this way, having better data and sharing with security services and law enforcement to understand where things are moving, and that is sort of lethal weapons, or people talking the Prevent programme, which still needs some improvement, although the last review of it says that it was still an effective tool, in the UK at least, against terror. But all of these things together are what's supposed to combat it. And you're right. Maybe we don't need that sort of community cliche. The people-to-people dialogue will happen anyway. What we need are firm ideas and firmer action to say what the cause and therefore what's the solution.
But certainly about online, and we do talk about that all the time. That's not something that just goes from one crisis or one horror to the next. I mean, the idea, what X has become is toxic, poisonous, vile. It should be within the power of governments to clean up what people are allowed to say. And they're all right, people will shout free speech. But, it's like shouting fire in the theatre. There are limits to free speech. And I think that those people that deliberately stir up race and religious hatred on all sides, poison some of them quite, prominent people.
But the government has that. The government has that ability and uses it. Incitement to violence online is a crime, and people have been convicted for it. So they have that ability to do that today.
But hatred goes on all the time. Just, hate. If you don't actually threaten somebody, you can still cause an awful lot of damage.
Well, Polly, I don't think countering hate is done through threats. And I think that is fundamentally the problem. If you're going to move forward and pass this, you can't counter hate with threats.
Well, I think hate speak, the more of it is, the more people feel they can say more. I mean, after the laws were brought in, anti-discrimination, language did change. Attitudes changed. You no longer had landladies saying no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. You had a whole different approach. What you do with the law does set the tone for conversation and for attitudes. And we've suddenly gone backwards. It's all being stripped away again. People seem to be able to say and shout anything they want of an abusive, racist, hate-filled kind. And I don't just think that can be policed.
But I saw a tweet this afternoon from somebody who was alleging that the gunman who died or was shot yesterday, that he was an Israeli plant, that he was a member of the IDF. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, it's been proved that he was a Syrian policeman before he went to Australia.
Yes.
So, and you think, well, why has somebody tweeted that? And the only reason they've tweeted that is to try and sort of make allegations against Israel or of an anti-Semitic nature. Yeah. That's all they're trying to do. So, I mean, how could you possibly weed that out in legal terms? I don't see how you could.
Well, I think you could have moderators who put big blobs on it saying conspiracy theory, beware.
But X has that policy, and where they'll do what they call a community note on posts that have issues of accuracy. And I think that is the way that you police this is that you allow other people to call it out. When, Robert Jenrick made those silly remarks about integration in Birmingham, other people called him out on it. When Nigel Farage says things that are distasteful, other people call him out on it. And I think you have to remember that, there are other people. It's not just the law that changes attitudes. People change attitudes as well. And they decide themselves that they're not going to stand for it. Quite often the laws track behind public support and public attitude. And I think that the problem with this whole discussion is that we forget that we all have our own responsibility to call things out, and we all have our own responsibility to say that these things aren't working. We don't necessarily need community leaders. We don't necessarily need legislators to tell us what's right. We can see that for ourselves. And I think the vast majority of people do know the difference between right and wrong.
The trouble is a lot of the calling out becomes a terrific clash, Yabu clash, between the two sides. It's not a sober, moderating voice saying, these are the facts, this isn't true. You just get a pile-on, and that doesn't really help either.
There was another example this afternoon where Dale Vince, who is sort of like green campaigner, big businessman, donor to the Labour Party, and he tweeted something pretty horrible, and he was set about. But then I thought, well, should I react to this? And I thought, yes, I should. He needs to be called out. Okay, lots of other people have done it already. And he eventually, I think, recognised that he'd gone a little bit quite a way over the top. But he then did the wrong thing. And instead of saying, look, I got this completely wrong, it was sort of sorry, not sorry. And you can't get away with that. If you're ever going to apologise on social media, do it properly, as I've learnt to my cost in the past. Anyway, enough of that. Good news, Richard Holden says he's coming back. No word from Tony Vaughan, but he hasn't got my number. So anyway, Richard Holden will be back. In case you've only just tuned in and wonder why I've only got two guests, it's not because they haven't turned up. It's because they had to go and do their political duty or parliamentary duty and go and vote. It's 8:30 on LBC. More of your questions in a moment to our panel. Let's get the latest news headlines from Matt Hewitt.
The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has accused the British Medical Association of a shocking disregard for people's safety. The resident doctors' strike in England will go ahead as planned from Wednesday after the union rejected a new government offer. Rob Reiner's younger son, Nick, has been arrested as a homicide investigation's opened into the death of the filmmaker and his wife at their home in LA. Donald Trump's launched an extraordinary attack on the 78-year-old Democrat activist, blaming his killing on his outspoken opposition to the president. And Australia's government has agreed to look at strengthening gun laws after yesterday's attack on Bondi Beach. 15 people were killed and around 40 injured by 2 gunmen. LBC weather. Cloudy across England and Wales tonight with rain moving eastwards. A patchy frost for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Lows of 1 to 12 degrees.
This is LBC. Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:33 on LBC. On our panel tonight, Salma Shah, political commentator, used to be an advisor to Sajid Javid. He's got a new book coming out next year, I've seen. Which,
he does.
Is quite a rather interesting one. Not the conventional political memoir either. Polly Toynbee is a columnist for The Guardian. You've always got a book coming out, Polly. Have you got a new one coming out?
I haven't at the moment because I'm a bit confused about what's happening, let alone about what's going to happen.
Well, if you're
so I'm kind of waiting
God
to
help
see
the rest of us. Now, we're happy to have Richard Holden back with us, Conservative Shadow Transport Secretary. He's been off to vote. He's obviously ran there quicker than he's running back. And hopefully Tony Vaughan will come back, Labour MP for Folkestone and Hythe. Joe is in Brighton. Hello, Joe.
Hi, good to speak to you, panel, and you, Ian. We haven't spoken for a little while, but my question is, Nigel Farage saying he's going to get rid of 68,000 civil service. Are we looking forward to the same chaos as the Trump administration? And doing that, it's already 1 hour to get through to HMRC. The less civil servants means the longer you're going to have to wait on the phone. Do you agree?
Now, the From UK MP Danny Kruger has been in charge of the party's efforts to streamline the civil service and has today announced plans to abolish 68,500 civil service jobs, saving £5.2 billion a year. Now, as I understand it, this will actually take us back to the levels of the civil service before COVID. So it sounds quite dramatic, but I wonder if it really is quite as radical. If you're watching, you've just seen a shadowy figure go behind my back. It's Richard Holden. He's back in the room. Salma, let's come to you first.
Yes, well, having worked with civil servants for about 6 years in government, I can tell you that there is definitely a lot more efficiency that's needed in the civil service. However, Reform's sort of headline proposition doesn't really think about how that marries up to what their agenda is in government or what they plan on delivering. So I don't know how you can decide that this is what's going to happen and you've got this headline number of jobs that are going to go without actually, being able to think about how that completely marries up to what your policy is going to be or what the economic situation is going to be at the time. Yeah, everybody's going to need cuts, but the where is the important, more so than the numbers. There's only one other thing that I think is important here is that, are we going to face the same chaos as America if Reform are voted in? Well, they promised this in Kent. and it's a shame we don't have the Folkestone MP here at the moment. He's probably still running back from the lobby. But they promised this in Kent and actually didn't go through the cuts that were required, and instead planning to put the council tax up. So there's one thing about talking a big game about cuts and efficiencies. There is another about delivering them.
Polly.
I think that's absolutely right. People get very confused.
Oh my God, I'm going to faint.
There we are. It just happens to be pre-Christmas agreement day. I think that the idea of crude numbers, cutting the civil service, get out next, cut them back to pre-Brexit. We've had to employ a lot more civil servants for Brexit because all sorts of things that were done in Europe, we now have to do. We've lost the Medicines Agency, all kinds of testing systems and other things we used to rely on for Europe, we now have to do ourselves. So you need more civil servants. Also, I think a lot of people, like my family, will have come across long delays in getting things from the civil service. Within my family, at the moment, waiting for probate for a relative. Mm-hmm. Interminable. Nothing complicated about the case. Nothing. No reply. Nothing. Can't get through to them. Nothing. The same with I'm trying to merge two very small charities just out of efficiency. No controversy. The Charity Commission, silence. And I think that lots of people know that we need more civil servants to do this stuff.
No, we don't need more civil servants, but sorry, go on in.
You need efficiencies. And
how can you be efficient?
Well, no, let me explain. How many of you are with Octopus Energy?
I am.
Do you have the same experience as me and all my friends who are, where you ring them up, they answer within 3 rings, you speak to somebody who's very competent, pleasant, can speak English, and they sort your problem out for you. Now, Octopus Energy ought to be used as templates for government public services.
I'm sorry, that's a category error. If more people apply to Octopus, they make more money and they can employ more people. In any kind of public service, it's capped. There is this amount of money, and the more people who use it doesn't bring more money in. It's a totally
but actually,
concept.
But Polly, people like Octopus Energy and other businesses will be using things like software and AI to assist them, and it will make the job easier so that actually they can employ fewer people. If you think that profit means that people are naturally going to be recruiting or hiring, then that is the wrong way of thinking about business. You're trying to get capital back out of your business in order to pay dividends and shareholders and directors and all those people who've worked hard to be able to earn that money. So actually, there is an efficiency lesson that you can learn from business. Not every lesson is applicable, I agree with that. But on customer service, definitely. When I was in the Home Office, the person who absolutely cleaned up the passport agency came from a private sector background, and he was a massive loss to the government, and he was utterly brilliant at the job that he did.
I got my passport in 10 days. How about that?
There you go.
Yes, I remember the queues.
And you didn't have to pay a premium. It was that good.
But it took a mighty crisis for that to happen.
No, absolutely. The what's it called now? The DVLA. They need to shut up the whatever.
Oh, I've just been returned my licence within days. I was astounded. So there you are.
Right, now Tony Vaughan is back with us, as is Richard Holden. They both know the question, I'm told. Simon, do you just want to put to Tony what you were saying about Kent?
Yeah, go on.
I was just
going
saying,
to start talking about Kent.
We were talking about whether, obviously, Nigel Farage and this plan to cut 68,000 civil servants actually amounted to anything. And I said, actually, the more interesting part of this question is what happened in Kent, because they said they were going to do it, and of course they didn't. And that's your patch. So,
and it wasn't just what they were saying; it was their whole campaign. So their whole idea was Doge, cut the fat. We'll get in there and get some serious, who were actually just a bunch of 21-year-olds wearing caps who actually didn't know what the hell they were doing, who disappeared within a very, very short space of time. They found out within about 3 months what everyone already knew, which was there was no fat left to cut, and that they were in exactly the same position as those who came before them, who the Tories. And so what we've got
I thought you were going to say sort of the Tories have done such a marvellous job.
No. They cut everything to the bone, and there was nothing left. And we've got basic services, social services, adult social care that are simply not functioning. And so if the idea here is to cut a ton of civil servants out in the hope that will cause efficiencies that will mean everything works better, I think it's completely deluded. I think there is so much that needs to happen. There are reforms that need to happen that can't happen at the pace that we need them to happen. And it may be that I'm sure somebody can identify a saving here or a saving there, but fundamentally we need these people in to put through the reforms that we fundamentally need to make our country work again. And we need civil servants to do that.
Richard?
I think one of the things which really surprised me today was the fact that they were proposing to cut a lot of their policy staff in the civil service, who are actually there's quite a lot of experts in there. Like there's a piece of here's the Employment Rights Bill, which we actually just voted on. It wasn't the Finance Bill, it's the Employment Rights Bill. But the people who draft this sort of thing, actually the things which will be necessary for somebody to really change the law and change what they want to do. It seems to be that's what they're really gunning for, which seems a very odd way of going about if you want to come in and be a transformational government. So it seems a lot of hot air. I think a bit like what Salma was saying. Look, there's no doubt that you can make great efficiencies, but there are some areas of the civil service actually where you actually do need more people, and one of those is actually not so much the DVLA, which I actually have the same experience as Polly on, but the DVSA, where we've got that's the driving tests, where so many Labour came in and said it's outrageous that we've seen these test delays under the Tories. We're going to do something about it. And what is it today? It's 3 weeks longer after 18 months of Labour government.
I mean, another example is the immigration system. I mean, we need more Home Office decision makers, and we need Home Office going to the appeals to actually make the system work. I mean, there are so many examples where there is undercapacity and not overcapacity, and I think this reform just sounds completely mental.
Joe, what do you make of what you've heard?
Yes, I mean, everybody knows if you ring HMRC, it's like 45 minutes to 51 minutes to get through. If you cut more staff, it's going to be a 3-hour wait. And we saw that when people were trying to find out during COVID to bring the Department of Business, can we open? What's the definition of a shop? Nobody knew anything. So this is nonsense. And this is why I wanted you lot to scrutinise it. And you've done a great job in scrutinising. And I hope all these callers who ring every day, like Daniel and Richard and the usual crowd, Luke and all of them, understand this is game over for the reform. What more evidence do you need?
All right, Joe, thank you very much. Martin in Doncaster, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, my question is with reform having more members than Labour now, as today's end-of-year liaison committee review being Keir Starmer's last? I hope so, and I'm a Labour voter.
So has the liaison committee appearance of Keir Starmer probably been his last? And obviously Martin hopes so. Well, I imagine you don't, Tony.
No,
or maybe you do.
No, I absolutely don't. I mean, look, Labour was in opposition for 14 years, sniping from the sidelines, and now we are in government. We are getting on with the serious reforms that we need. And the idea that we should just be turfing out the Prime Minister after, less than 2 years, I just think is completely wrong. And I think that we just have to get on with the reforms that we need to implement, like 29 billion for the NHS, 5 successive interest rate cuts because of the stability that we brought to the economy. The Great British Railways Bill to make sure that our railways actually function for the future. All of these things are being done by a Labour government, and I get the frustrations. I know that on the doorstep people are hurting, and I know that means that there is going to be massive impatience for change. It's felt that there is not enough that is being done quickly enough. I get that, but that's not a reason to just completely throw the baby out of the bathwater. I mean, I really believe that, and I think that it's very hard for me to sort of say to people, you just have to sort of grin and bear it for now. And I'm not saying that. I really want us to get on with implementing the change we were voted to implement.
Richard.
Well, look, if I was a Labour MP, I'd be hoping it was his last. A bit like you've got your Labour voter on the line there, because I think he's done an absolutely appalling job. And it's not just me who thinks that, it's the public. You can see his opinion poll ratings are only beneath him is Rachel Reeves. So, and I think they're also pretty tied together on that. And I think that's because what happened is, and it's pretty clear to me now. I think everyone was asking this question for the first few months. What does Keir Starmer stand for? I think we have got absolutely no idea what he really believes, what he really stands for, who he's fighting for, even a lot of the time. Because they went after the winter fuel at one point, and they went after farmers, and they went after businesses. They talk about growth on one side, yet impose one of the harshest businesses on employment, particularly on employment of women, young people, and part-time workers. We've seen in a really long time. And it just strikes me at the moment that we've got there is, and you can feel it from the cabinet, There's clearly jostling for position, who might be next.
Never happened in your day, did it?
Well, of course not. No. Well,
I was going to say,
not when
Richard.
I was in the cabinet, no.
No, but I mean, that was actually a serious point, because you had however many prime ministers it was, 5 in 7 years or something like that. It's not a good look to the electorate to constantly change leaders. So Labour would be mad to go down that road,
I think the crucial thing is whoever, and I think Labour will change leader before the next election, but whoever they do change to, if I was a Labour person, right, obviously I hope they choose somebody without any vision or anything else, a bit like the one they've got at the moment as Prime Minister. But if I was, I would be thinking of who are we for? What are we about? We've just gone through this process in the Conservative Party. We've had to rethink about what it is to be a Conservative. Starting to come out with policies. I was announcing one with Kemi today about how we want to make changes to the zero emissions vehicle mandate and stop the scrapping of petrol and diesel cars. I think that's a sensible move in the right direction. But you can go down the rabbit warren, especially when you're in government. And I think that whoever's going to be thinking about Labour in the future, they need to start thinking about who they're for. I think Conservatives are starting to rethink that now. And I think Labour needs to do it pretty quickly.
Who would you like to face at the next election, and who would you not like to face?
Well, I honestly, I don't. I think any of the front runners at the moment are fine. I think Keir Starmer would be an absolutely disaster for the Labour Party. I think if Rachel Reeves is still there, I'd be absolutely astonished. It's going to be. I mean, David Lammy. I mean, maybe he's even worse. If the public got to know him, after his performances on Mastermind and and letting everybody out of prison early. I don't know. There's maybe Ed Miliband. Well, it's gone. We all know it's more than doubled.
Okay.
And maybe Ed Miliband. I mean,
Tony, I think you've got to have a right reply here.
Yeah, look, I get why Richard's saying all this stuff, but look, what the government has brought is stability that was lacking in those years of Tory rule, and then that's why it's led to a more stable economy. It really has.
A stable economy with no growth.
Well, yeah, but look across Western Europe and see what the trends are, and we are in a much more stable position than countries like France, than countries like Germany.
It's just not true.
And actually, the reality is what Labour does stand for is for working people, for public services, and creating a greater sense of fairness in our tax system. That's why, for example, that we've had the last spending review was the largest revenue-raising budget in many, many years, and we're putting the investment that is needed for our public services that has not been actually put into the system for years and years. That's why people are seeing the absolute abject.
Richard says, Maggie was very unpopular 18 months after she won a landslide in 1979. It wasn't quite a landslide. What's changed? People expect positive changes too fast. We're going to go to a break and then get quick responses from Salma and from Polly on this. 8:48.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:49 on LBC. Richard Holden is here, Tony Vaughan, Salma Shah and Polly Toynbee. Now, you two didn't get an opportunity to answer that last question. So, Salma, let's come to you first on Keir Starmer's future, or possibly lack of it.
I'm going to make this really simple, having lived through the Tory psychodrama of the last government. don't wish for somebody to leave unless you're sure about what you want to replace them. And, who are the candidates available? I think Martin, who called in and asked the question, I think if it's clear in Martin's mind who should be the next leader and whether they've got a vision and whether they've got the gumption to be able to carry it out, then okay, fair enough, but don't do it unless you know what's to come, because quite often it gets worse.
Polly?
Yeah, very wise words from somebody on the Conservative side, which Labour would do well to listen to. I don't think it would be a good idea to throw him out. For one thing, whoever comes in next from any party, that might be Nigel Farage as well, will be constrained by exactly the same thing. Everything we've heard about Kent, we're true with knobs on about government. There isn't suddenly going to be an avalanche of money available or fantastic savings you can make or some radical different direction. Any new Labour leader will be just as constrained by the markets, bond markets, and nervous about doing anything that might frighten them at all, because Labour is always under much more suspicion by markets than Tories.
I wonder why.
Tories get away with murder. And Labour only has to twitch slightly and they all freak out. It took Liz Truss...
I don't think that's quite right, Polly, but okay.
It took Liz Truss for the markets to totally panic under a Tory. But anyway, I think I can't see the purpose.
So you're not attracted by Andy Burnham's fluttering eyelashes?
Well, I think a lot of them are very good. I think Wes Streeting is great. I think he'd be very good. I think Andy Burnham would be good. I think a lot of them are good. But how you get from here to there without Armageddon? If he were to say after the May elections, I think I've done my best and I'll hand over to somebody else now, and there was an orderly means by which you appointed a new leader, well, possibly. But the new leader will have trouble, and I no doubt will be deeply unpopular within 18 months as well. So, I'm mystified by the level of hatred of Starmer. He's a sensible, serious, decent man. He hasn't got much charisma. He hasn't got all sorts of things people might wish for. But there's nothing to hate about him. It's a mystery to me that he can be quite so profoundly unpopular. And I suspect it's about politics. And whoever else gets that nasty job, they'll be treated the same way and hated just as much.
Do you think Kemi Badenoch's got him on the run a bit at the moment?
Not really. She's perked up a bit. She's got a bit better at PMQs. But no, not really.
Well, don't you think that's testament to his weakness then? If you think that she's just by her perking up a bit, that actually he's sort of faltering in the chamber. He looks like he's really heavy on his feet. He has no witty retorts to anything. He seems like he spends a lot of time being abroad and enjoying that a lot more than sort of the difficult task of actually improving the UK economy.
The abroad thing is serious. There he is in Berlin now. It is a really important... It looks as if just possibly...
This is his job.
Just possibly, it might be, we might be about to get a deal. Who knows? We could be on the edge of peacemaking deals. But, we're right at the forefront of that together with France and Germany. And the idea that he should stay at home because people grumble he's away too much. And if they don't like him, they might prefer him away than at home.
Right, let's go to a text question from Carl in Northampton. When generals and spy chiefs start talking about Russian aggression against this country rather than just Ukraine, are they just warmongering and trying to justify their own huge taxpayer-funded salaries? Now, a bit of background to this. Both the head of the armed forces, Sir Richard Knighton, and the head of MI6, Blaise Metrovelli, have both warned today that Russian aggression poses a significant threat to the UK, with Sir Richard saying that all of us will need to do our bit, not necessarily through fighting a war, but possibly through using our skills and our money. Richard, what do you think he means by that?
Well, I think I was a special advisor in the MOD for a while, actually at the start of the Ukraine war, and while we were actually battling ISIS in Mosul as well, which was the first time that drones sort of appeared. Now we know that there's basically a supply chain of drones from Iran via Russia into harming Ukraine, and that's been a new element of warfare. Another big element of warfare, though, is actually this sort of grey zone warfare, which people talk a lot about. This is a sort of attacking companies, taking out sort of power systems, not by by bombing them with planes, but by hacking and all that sort of thing. And it's pretty clear to me that right across the piece we're seeing that. Even in the UK Parliament in the last few months, we've seen 2 Chinese spies who were there, kicked out by the Speaker. For some reason, the government decided not to prosecute them, which I thought was a disgrace. But the
CPS decided.
Well, yes, after what I think was pretty clear was immense government pressure, decided not to. And I think we're in this situation now. We've seen the Russian tankers dragging their anchors along seabeds to rip up communications cables in the Baltic. We're seeing a huge amount. I was actually, as I think I mentioned earlier, in Germany, and they've had all sorts of pressures put on their politicians over there. I met one who said he'd been met and given a list of things he couldn't say by a foreign government, otherwise German companies would be under threat. There are really serious things happening here on actions which would traditionally fall short of war, but are basically economic warfare. China and Russia are massively stepping up, and it is actually incumbent on us all to a greater or lesser degree, but incumbent on us all to be really aware of that. These are genuine hostile actors who are doing all sorts of horrific things, often in that grey zone today.
Salma.
I'm surprised by the question, actually, that somehow, British public servants are just sort of stoking up, war because of their taxpayer-funded salaries. I think that's preposterous. And like Richard, I also worked inside government, but not for the MOD, for the Home Office, which dealt with the security services. And these threats are real. You only need to look at the Salisbury poisoning.
Yeah.
Novichok, the amount of Novichok that was found could have killed 4,000 people. So let's get real about this. And these people are not sat there just thinking up ways.
But Salma, there's no threat from Russia.
Well, quite. But
that's what many of our listeners tell me every time we do a phone.
So this is nonsense. You need to look at hostile state bot factories. So just going back to our previous conversation about what happens on social media, not everything there is safe in terms of not just people speaking from ignorance, but actually real hostile messaging being put out there, disinformation and misinformation to create certain behaviours in people that read it. And we are also looking at, a much more hostile ally in the form of the US. Now, I think that relationship can still be salvaged. I think there are still ways that Europe can speak to the US in our interest, but clearly, in the way that we've seen with Russia and Ukraine, that has not been in our corner.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you. I completely agree with Salma. I mean, this is a real and serious threat. I mean, Russia tried Ukraine once and got a little bit further in, and then it launched this full-scale war, and this is still continuing. And this is, I agree with everything the other panellists have said about this, that particularly the issue about bots and factories that are interfering with our democracy. And we have a situation where on my Facebook page I'll frequently get high numbers of commenters, and you go into the profile and have a little look, you dig beneath the surface, and they're obviously bots, and that's happening more and more and more to polarize our debate, and it's interfering with our democratic processes. We really have to get on top of this, because I completely agree there is a military threat that Richard has described, but all of these other mechanisms of warfare that go beyond traditional warfare that are serious threats to democracy. And I agree, people have to get real. This is a true and real.
I think we also just need to remember, right, we've seen for the first time since the Second World War, I think, an elected or somebody who wasn't an elected politician found guilty of basically treachery, right, being paid by the Russians. The former MEP Reform leader in Wales, right, in the last few days, right, he's been given a serious prison sentence, right. When you're seeing elected politicians clearly in the pay of foreign governments, and then you've got people out there thinking, oh well, it's all nonsense. This is true. This is happening now. It's happening in our country, and people need to wake up to it.
Holly?
I think it's such a shock for us. We're I was born in the very end of 1946, post-war generation. Never really expected war, at least not wars fought. on our territory in Europe. And I don't think at the time of the Brexit vote, if there had been this around then, people might not have voted to split ourselves off from the rest of Europe. And we need to get back, certainly in the defence sphere, which we seem to be doing as fast as we can, and make sure that we have a defence system that makes sense between all European countries. I mean, who knows what would happen now? If Poland were invaded, would the Americans be interested? I'm not sure they would.
I think it's interesting.
Would be there anymore.
I think it's interesting that you've said that. Is that somehow we need to lean closer into Europe? We haven't really considered what we have in the UK today in terms of defence technology that we should be investing in, and I find it completely ridiculous that you're having, senior civil servants, top brass in the military saying this, but they're not looking across government and thinking about, well, how could we deploy science funding more effectively to look at the technologies of tomorrow? We have, at Cambridge University in particular, some amazing projects, researchers that are really going to be at the forefront of our defence in the future, and we should be thinking about that now. So this is not a hoax. This is not something that's ridiculous. Today, the decisions that we make could save us tomorrow.
Just to clarify what Richard was talking about there, Nathan Gill was jailed for 10.5 years for accepting around £40,000 worth of bribes in return for making pro-Russia statements and speeches in the European Parliament and during interviews. Let's go to our fun question with Ollie in Gloucester, who says, football star Lionel Messi very nearly caused a riot in India because he turned up to a solo tour event in a stadium but only stayed for 20 minutes. What's the most disappointing public event you've ever been to? It could be the Hyde Park Christmas market of a few years ago. Do you remember that? Salma?
I didn't go to a public event, but I went to an exhibition at the British Museum that was really awful. And I did what all English people do when they're really annoyed about the fact that they've spent a load of money going to this blockbuster exhibition that turned out to be very
George
poor.
Osborne.
I am. I should have written him a letter. That would have been a very English thing to do, but instead I muttered very loudly.
Tony?
How disappointing it was.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I went to the count very briefly for the Kent County Council elections in earlier this year, where Reform got a clean sweep. So that was very disappointing, and I don't think I even stayed for 20 minutes.
Richard?
Oh, as a junior researcher, I was sent to 5 Labour Party conferences. So I think it's not 1, it's 5 public events for me.
Polly?
Well, I actually went to an appalling play on Saturday night that cost a fortune in the West End, something that had transferred from Broadway, and it cost a fortune. The whole audience was roaring with laughter, and I sat there like a lemon. I could not
What was
see
it, Polly?
anything funny. I think I won't say.
You should have come with me to Riverdance. You'd have loved it.
Oh, I'd have loved that. I would have liked that.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
That would have had some fun in it. This was dire.
Oh, sorry about that.
I won't say what it is because it's a bit mean.
Right, well, thank you very much for all of your comments on tonight's programme, and thank you too for actually making the effort to come back. Really appreciate it. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have Conservative MP Sarah Ball and the former Boris Johnson advisor Gito Harry, plus a representative from Labour and another unnamed person. Corey and Chris have got some work to do over the next 24 hours. Now, after the news, we're going to talk about the warnings about the threat Russia poses to this country, not Ukraine, which have come from both the head of the armed forces and the new head of MI6. The chief of the defence staff, Sir Richard Knighton, says Moscow does want to attack a NATO country, and ultimately we're all going to have to do our bit to defend Britain. You might not have to fight, but you could offer your skills, knowledge, or maybe your cash. Meanwhile, this country's new top spy says that things like cyber attacks and drones hovering near public airports and shutting them down are examples of Russia testing our response now. They're saying we all need to step up. But would you?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Resident Doctors Union says the Health Secretary should work with them on a credible offer to avoid strike action in the short time left before Wednesday's walkout. BMA members in England will take industrial action for 5 days to protest pay levels and job opportunities. Downing Street's calling the action self-indulgent, irresponsible and dangerous. Bill Morgan, a former health policy advisor to Rishi Sunak, told LBC calmer heads on both sides are needed.
It looks like support amongst resident doctors is building up once again. There was a period over the last few months where support seemed to be waning amongst the resident doctor workforce, but they seem to be increasingly dug in now, which I think is rather worrying for the future.
A British government minister has been heckled as she pledged solidarity with Jewish people at a memorial for the 15 people killed in the Bondi Beach terror attack. Ashley Dalton told mourners in London that the government won't tolerate anti-Semitism. She was interrupted by calls of "Stop the Marchers." Gideon Falter is from joint organisers of the memorial. The campaign